Hello, everyone, and welcome again to another episode of Observable Flutter. My name is Craig Labenz, and I'm excited today to talk about a new project in Dart. Obviously, every language has to have its static site generator or static site generators, and Dart should be no exception. So that's what we're going to talk about today, but I won't spoil any more of the punchline. Instead, we'll try to get right into it. So as always, this is the Flutter community. We want to be the most welcoming, the warmest, the kindest tech community out there. So let's all try our best to live up to that. All right. Joining me today is a name that needs no introduction, though I will introduce him all the same. Matt Carroll, once a Googler, worked on the Flutter team, now running Super Declarative and the Flutter Bounty Hunters. You know him. So let's just say hello and start learning about Matt's new project. Matt, welcome to Observable Flutter. Would you like to say a few more words to introduce yourself?
Sure. Well, good morning, Craig, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you tuning in from around the world. As Craig said, my name is Matt Carroll. I was on the Flutter team from 2018 to 2020. I left in 2020 to try to help companies adopt Flutter any way that I could, from YouTube education to corporate training to consulting to contract development. And Craig mentioned the Flutter Bounty Hunters as well. Maybe we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But that effort is a team of remote developers working exclusively on open source Flutter and Dart packages with some amount of corporate funding. We're trying to solve some problems for the last time by doing it out in the open. But with that, Craig, I find that in situations like this, it's probably best for the one of us who's not steeped in all things static site and Static Shock to pick kind of the entry point for us, and then we can take it from there.
Sure. So if anyone is unfamiliar with static site generation as a concept, maybe we just start there briefly.
Sure.
A long time ago. Oh,
Yeah.
sorry. Do you have a thought?
Sure. I guess I could offer that intro if you'd like, but by all means, interrupt me if you want to bring in your own background there with static sites. I was just talking about this yesterday, actually, on our weekly Flutter space, and there's a lot of different ways you can kind of define a static site, and those definitions mostly work most of the time, and then sometimes they don't. But one way that I like to look at it is that a static website is a website where all of your website files are generated at build time. So you might, in case of a generator, for example, you run some command, it generates all your files, and then you kind of drop them onto a vanilla web server, which is kind of like a glorified file server. So a request comes in for an HTML file or an image or a font file or a CSS file, and the server just serves it up, and that's all there is to it, which means you don't have databases, you don't have custom server code, you don't, that's what makes it dynamic. That doesn't exist. It's static. You just kind of build it and deploy it and you're done. Again, that definition isn't perfect. And Craig, I don't know if you'd like to modify that, but that's roughly how I look at it.
Yeah, for sure. All of that I think is totally correct. The angle that I was going to take on it was that in the earliest days, websites were all what we would now just call a static site. They were like fully prepared HTML files that were usually written by hand sitting on a web server. And then they were just downloaded every single HTTP GET request. And then people started to think like, well, this is actually really tedious if I've got a lot of pages and a lot of products. And so then frameworks like, Django and Ruby on Rails and .NET ones that I don't know anything about started to emerge that helped have a database driven website. But then that kind of went too far and took control of too many things. And so static sites, as we now know them, ended up being this kind of middle ground where you would dynamically generate a potentially large amount of files, or if it's a blog, then they're kind of all handwritten again. But yeah, like you said, at build time, and they get turned back into HTML files. And part of the generation part is that you're not actually writing the HTML anymore. You're writing Markdown or potentially something else. And then but those get kind of smushed through a system, and like Play-Doh going through a toy, out the other end comes actual HTML again. And then you just upload them to a server. And now there's also globally available servers like Firebase hosting and, many, many others as well. And that really simplifies the task of maintaining this server. And so the whole thing just becomes very easy and pleasant, generally speaking. But it's, all things in tech just kind of go in circles and keep bouncing back and forth. And one solution to a different problem gets taken too far. And then people realize, well, actually, the old solution had something to it. And this is just one of those. So I think it's all actually kind of pretty funny.
Yeah, that's very true. And I guess to put a point on your earlier description about creating a bunch of HTML files back in the day, to be clear about why that was so tedious is that, again, back in the 90s, the way you would do that, if you wanted to have, let's say you have a blog and you want to add a new blog post, you'd go copy all of the HTML from your previous blog post and paste it into a new file and then update the text, because there was no mechanism for actually sharing the layout, so to speak. So 100 blog posts was like 100 actual independent files of HTML, and you, the human being, had, if you want to make a change to your layout for your entire blog, that's 100 times that you have to do that. So that's how painful it was. That's kind of what led, again, you mentioned things like Django and I think Ruby on Rails, but that's also what led to PHP. Like the whole thing about PHP was your HTML is going to be generated on the server so that you can block out some areas and load that content from your database. Now, that also meant you were suddenly on the hook for deploying an entire web server just to do that. The big name back in the day was the LAMP stack, Linux, Apache, MySQL, and PHP. And again, a lot of people, they deployed that entire stack just so they wouldn't have to write the same HTML 100 times for 100 pages.
Yeah. As you were saying that, I was reminded of PHP, which was my first language post-college, because I immediately went into web development. And it's been a very long time since I've looked this up, so my confidence in this is down a bit. But I believe the first meaning behind PHP was personal homepage. And then it eventually became one of those cheeky recursive names. And then it became PHP hypertext preprocessor. But I think it was originally just personal homepage, and that's what people were using it for. Oh, Randall, no, get out of here. Get out of here. You Perl junkie. That isn't what it was. Okay. So yes, today we're here to talk about Static Shock, which is in this space that you and I have been chatting about. And I would say the most popular one, I haven't run any surveys. I don't know. I think the most popular one, especially if you measure over the last 10 years, is probably Jekyll, written in Ruby. Very, very big websites have used Jekyll. I know President Barack Obama's campaign websites were powered by Jekyll back in 2012 and 2016. So that has a long and storied history already. And then there's other ones. There's Ghost, and I'm actually not fluent in these. Matt, maybe you can say more, or people have already gotten it. But we like Dart. So maintaining a Ruby tool chain on your computer is pretty annoying. I never know what to do when I have the wrong Ruby version. I don't want to update it. I don't want to even learn. So I'm pretty excited about the idea to just do this in Dart. And Matt, tell me kind of how you see all that.
Yeah. So there are literally hundreds of static site generators out there, probably dozens per technology stack. You mentioned Jekyll. That is probably the most battle-tested, long-lived static site generator. This may have changed recently, I'm not sure, but for a long time, and possibly this is still true, the only static site generator that is what you could say is natively understood by GitHub pages is Jekyll. So if you generate a Jekyll project, you don't have to tell GitHub anything else other than, hey, this is a Jekyll project. And GitHub's like, okay, we know how to build that and we know how to deploy it. In more recent times, one static site generator that's become very popular is Hugo, Hugo. That is a Go-based static site generator. And their kind of PR claim to fame is that they're like the fastest one in terms of generation speed. Now, I'll admit that in my experience with static websites, the time to generate the site has never been the limiting factor, but it's possible that for organizations out there with thousands of pages on their website, that actually is something worth considering. I also recently discovered the last couple of years, discovered Loom, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. It's Lume, and that is a JavaScript TypeScript static site generator, which is built with Deno, which I believe is an alternative to Node. that the API for Loom actually heavily influenced Static Shock. And just a small correction to the record, even though this is my first time here talking about Static Shock, I've actually been working on it for well over a year at this point. So not quite as new and fresh as you might think. But that API was heavily influenced by Loom because I was putting some websites together. I was like, listen, I have these problems that we just discussed. I'm going to use a static site generator to get around some of these problems. I chose Loom. And I was like, on the one hand, I'm loving this API. I'm loving how much they leaned into using code in the static site generator, which I'll come back to in just a moment. So I took a lot of inspiration from that API. I brought it to Static Shock. I made it available in Dart, a language that everybody listening to this is very familiar with and very capable, because I want to empower the Flutter and Dart developers to not only use a static site generator, but to extend it and to customize it. And that, let me go back now to the part about programming languages and static site generators. It's very common with Jekyll and Hugo and some of these others that you won't even understand the underlying programming language, but you'll follow their instructions to like get it set up on your system and start building. And from that point forward, all you're doing is working with configuration files, whether YAML files, Markdown files. I'm sure there's probably other configuration type files like TOML instead of YAML. And that's kind of all you do. You don't know how to write the Ruby code. You don't know how to write the Go code. You don't know how to run the compilation of the system. And so you're limited to just configuration, which will get you somewhere, but not everywhere. On the other hand, if you say, no, we're going to embrace programming here. Well, now all the doors are open. Yes, you still have your YAML. Yes, you still have your Markdown. You still have your templates. But you can also go into, in this case, the Dart file, and you can do anything you want. You can make network calls. You can make local database calls. You can write plugins. All of that is now on the table. And that's what I wanted to bring to this community, is to empower all of you to use your favorite programming language, Dart, to accomplish anything you want for your needs. So does that cover the bases there, Craig, or is there anything I should go deeper into from your side?
Yeah, I think we'll go deeper into a lot of it as we go. I didn't even know that it was that rich of I don't even know if we'd call it a templating system still anymore. I mean, obviously there will be templating in this, but if we would only call it a templating system still, maybe we can decide that as a group at the, or presume, Matt, you already have an opinion on that. But that's a really rich page building API and experience. I remember back in the Mustache and Handlebars days of templating, those were JavaScript libraries. There was this in Jinja, which was the kind of the most feature rich, but there was a hearty debate about whether or not it even made sense to have things like if statements in your templates, because then that was going to put logic in the presentation layer and really in whatever prepared the context for the template. Some people thought, well, that should handle everything. And then others were like, well, what would our template even look like if it doesn't have if statements in it? And like every programming debate, it's turned into a holy war. So it sounds like you've taken a pretty decided stance in the direction of putting power, or is this actually in the code that prepares the context for the template? Is that where this is all happening?
So yeah, first let's step back and look at the broader kind of programming concept, or this question of, are templates good or bad? I think the first thing you've got to do is separate server-based applications from local static site generation. Because if you really dig into the why would anyone be hesitant to put so-called business logic or even presentation logic into a template? Well, it's because if you're delivering an application to users, you are responsible for correctness. This is why Flutter, for example, has however many thousands of tests that run constantly. So if you're in charge of correctness, are you going to achieve that more effectively with behavior in your templates? Or let's just go back to Ruby on Rails. If you're writing Ruby through Rails, will you be more effective if your Ruby code produces a view model that has already chosen every property that will be displayed in the HTML? Well, that latter option, the one where you pre-compute everything, way easier to test. You don't even have to generate the final HTML. You can just validate your view model. And then at that point, you're using your architectural constraints as a way to more effectively test. Now, in the world of static sites, there's no application code really. I mean, yes, you can write your Dart code that extends it, but you're not building a server-side application. You have 99.999% less complexity. And so really it's just a question of what's the fastest, most convenient path to get my little website out the door. And from that perspective, yeah, templates with if statements and loops make this infinitely easier. You really, there are things that rise to the level of complexity where absolutely writing Dart code makes sense. But also one of the ideas that I want everyone in the community to come away with is that there are also many times where the fastest, easiest, most convenient, simplest way to do something is not to write Dart or any code at all. It's just to put some, to go back to mustache templates, some curly braces with a variable name in essentially an HTML template, and then you're done. There's nothing to it. Sometimes that's the way to go. So Static Shock leans heavily into templating. And you mentioned Jinja. Jinja is actually the templating engine that Static Shock uses. If other people really want or need other templating engines later, we can make that a configurable thing. For right now, Jinja is the one that's baked in.
All right. Well, should we start looking at it?
Yeah. Also, and I think, so like one thing I was hoping to do is show a number of actual live websites that are generated with Static Shock. And my only goal with that is to make it clear to everyone out there that Static Shock and static site generators, they do not tell you what your website looks like. They have no opinion on UI, UX. That's up to you. Static site generators are a tool for bringing a bunch of input files into a pipeline, generating your output files, whether you're using CSS or Sass or Tailwind, HTML, HTMX, that's all up to you and how it looks and feels. And I just want to drive that point home by showing the audience some live examples. So let me real quickly share my screen. I'll walk you through those, and then I'll turn it back over to Craig, who will actually try to drive through some usage.
All right, while you're bringing up your screen, Randall is claiming that LAMP was actually legitimately originally Perl. I had no idea.
Well, he is he's more of a historian on that front than you or I. So Randall, I will trust you on that. All I know is when I was probably, I don't know, was I 12, 13, 14 when I was messing with this? For me, the P always seemed to be for PHP, and all the online blogs were PHP. I mean, like all the forums that talked about it was all PHP.
Yeah, it sounds like you and I came in at about the same time. Okay, so we've got some examples here.
Yeah. So I'm just going to, every site that I'm about to show you was generated with Static Shock, and it is currently deployed publicly. You can go to the URL. But this first page here is a single page marketing web page for both my link to GitHub sponsorships, which maybe we'll come back and plug at the very end. It's also where people go to hire me for proprietary development. And you'll see here, just to give you a sense of what the UI, UX is like. So the colors, the layout. I'm just going to scroll through here so you have a sense of it. Got some videos in here, links to OSS work. And at the end, you can, if you wanted to contact me, we got a little contact form that pops up. Then we can go over to flutterbountyhunters.com. Also generated with Static Shock. This one's also a single marketing web page, but just notice the difference here in theming, the colors, the fonts, the layout. Use cases similar, but the layout here is a bit different. By the way, Craig, as soon as you would like to have me back, I'd be happy to cover any of the other packages that I've created, including things like Super Editor, a document editing toolkit for Flutter, and Flutter Test Robots, which adds some nice tools for writing widget tests. But again, another website generated with Static Shock. Then there's blog.flutterbountyhunters.com. And now not only do we have a bit of a different UI UX, but now we have a different use case. This isn't a marketing page now. This is a blog. All of these are individual blog pages. So now we have the main page, and then we can go into the actual page for the blog post. This is flutterarbiter.com. This is a website where I'm accumulating guides about how to effectively work with Flutter and Dart. This is similar in use case to a blog, except these are kind of technically guides. They live forever. They're not based on time, but we still have a main page that links to other pages. And again, we have some differences in layout and UI UX. Every week on Wednesday, I host a conversation about Flutter with Ray Lee. We call these Flutter Spaces. They're on X. This website is where we post all of our recordings, flutterspaces.com. This was also and is generated by Static Shock. And you'll see here we have all of these podcast episodes from previous conversations. Each of these podcast players is pulled from a YAML configuration file. So all I do is stick in the ID of the podcast, and the static site generator injects the relevant HTML to generate this page. Fluttershaders.com is a brand new initiative. I put together this website, and Ralph is doing a lot of the shader work. But what we're doing here is accumulating what we believe are shaders that show the power of what you can do in a Flutter app with shaders. So you have something like Shader Toy, which kind of is every possible shader under the sun. What we're saying here is you're a Flutter developer, you're building application experiences. Here are various shaders that might be useful for creativity within an app context specifically. But this website also, again, generated with Static Shock. And by the way, a recent one from Ralph here is this glitch transition, which I think is really awesome. So as Flutter navigates from one screen to another, it does this RGB glitch effect, which, not for every kind of branding use case, but I think it works pretty well for this kind of Spider-Man into the Spider-Verse example.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Then, of course, staticshock.io, which is the documentation website for Static Shock, is, surprise, surprise, generated with Static Shock. If you want to come here later and learn how to use Static Shock, we have this guides section with a number of common tasks that you're likely to want to accomplish with Static Shock. And then also, now this is a multi-page kind of more complicated documentation website, but I also have a number of single-page documentation websites or web pages. So for Flutter test robots, for example, this web page is generated with Static Shock. You'll notice here we have the latest version of the package automatically injected for us, links to GitHub, Discord, sponsorships, pub, and again, just colors, fonts, layout, and all this stuff. Notice that once again, we have something different than all the others. So there is no consistent constraints or imposed UI UX, and I just wanted to make that abundantly clear. So with that, I'm now going to turn it back over to Craig, and Craig, we can actually maybe take this thing for a spin.
Well, I should probably unmute. I said, all right, sounds great. Let me bring my screen up. You and I had both shared our screens earlier, and then they went away. I don't know why that happened. Sharing my screen. This one.
And to set the stage for what Craig is about to do, Static Shock comes in two pieces. There's the package, which is literally called Static Shock, which is the actual code for generating your final website. But where Craig is going to start is a command line tool, which is called Static Shock CLI.
This was here before. Whoa, this is interesting. So when I went to half size, the site's responsive layout snapped into a new orientation, and it actually doesn't show the CLI install. Oh, is that because you're assuming that person's on a tablet and thus they don't have a CLI?
Yeah, I think. Well, and yes, that, and also like if you're looking at this on your phone or tablet, there's probably just probably have nothing to do with that particular command. But yeah, I try to remove as much information as possible once we get down into phone sizes.
Yeah, that makes sense. There's this is like the world of adaptive everything is exploding, and the permutations of states that users can be in, the sheer number of edge cases, I think everyone is starting to realize is way bigger than we thought. And yeah, just like, oh, I'm on a phone now, so you're not the only one bumping into these kinds of things. I think they're testing every website and every app in the whole world. Anyway, right. I have now run the command.
Okay. And so I don't know how many people in the audience do a lot of local global activations. And so it might be worth just talking for a moment about what that means. So when you put a command line package on pub, other people, like Craig in this case, can tell his local system that, hey, I want you to make this package available everywhere on my system. So the command here, dart pub global activate, that's the standard set of keywords. And then you put whatever the name of the package is. And after you do that, in this case, everywhere you go in the terminal on your machine, you can type the word shock, and you will have access to the binary tool, the command line tool. Yep. So there you go. See it in the pub cache. So now I guess maybe we can also frame this a little bit. I think an exercise that Craig and I talked about doing today is that one of the focal points of Static Shock, and this is not, like, you saw all the different ways that it can be used, and I want people to use it for all static sites. But one place that I'm putting extra effort is in the area of documentation. I think every package should have at least a single page, if not a full-blown guide website, to really make it as easy as possible for people to use your package. And in that vein, I'm going to help create a documentation website for a package called Flutter Deck. Now, Flutter Deck is not my package. It's created by Mungirdus. It is, I think, probably the preeminent slideshow generator package currently on pub. And so what Craig and I thought we might do is start that process of creating that actual documentation website together here using Static Shock. Now, you'll see a very long README file. And as far as README files go, this is a great one. This is a lot more effort than most people ever put in. The downside is, as you scroll through this, where is one section end and another section begin? You have no navigation. It's just this massive list of information. So we're going to try to take this, break it down into pages, and put it into a static site. And then after we're done today, I'll actually put that up as a PR, or I guess maybe even if Craig, we do this on your end, you can put it up as a PR for that package. And we will get that static site merged into Flutter Deck so that there's a website you can go to and learn all these same things.
Somehow I'm going to be credited as a contributor to this amazing package that I will have not actually meaningfully contributed to. But okay. So let's get started.
Yeah. So make sure you're in a free directory somewhere where we can throw in a bunch of files.
Is the create command going to generate the folder as well, or should I create a folder?
Well, it'll be up to you. You can add the directory at the very end, but the safest thing is probably to create your directory, jump into it as your working directory, and take it from there. And so once we're in this directory, once you're in the place where you want to generate your static site, you'll say, well, you won't do the argument there yet with the dot. You'll just say shock create, because we're going to answer a bunch of questions. So Static Shock ships a few different templates. This selection will be growing over time. Right now, we have a blog, we have a multi-page documentation website, and we kind of have the minimal empty-ish template. So Craig, go ahead and choose documentation, and we'll continue with the questions. Now,
what is this? Oh, that's not what I wanted. All right. That's better.
Is that okay? Good. I was worried there that I did something wrong with the prompts that was going off screen. Okay, so now one thing to always remember about Static Shock projects is that we said they're based on Dart, right? Which means that every project you generate is a Dart project, which means there's a pub spec file and it needs to have a name for that package. So exactly, Craig, that's exactly what you want. Flutter Deck Docs, that's the project we're creating. Now, PubSpec also has a description line, right? So whatever you would want that description to be in your package, you'll put that in here for this question. Okay. And now we're shifting direction a little bit. You've described your project, but you're documenting a package. So now what package are you documenting? That's right, Flutter Deck. Now we want a human readable name, so we can put that, and you probably don't need the quotes there.
Right.
It'll automatically, it'll automatically quote it for you.
Terminals, they'll never catch on. Also, mine is completely borked because of my resizing.
All right, and then this is kind of like a tagline that you would want for the package.
Okay, let's grab that. Is pasting even going to work right now? Oh, it did.
We'll find
Good job,
out.
terminal.
All right. And is it on pub?
Sure.
The answer to that is yes. And then is it on GitHub? The answer to that is also yes.
Yeah.
And then we're going to give two pieces of information. One is the username, and then in the next question will be the repo name. So if you pull up the GitHub repo, you can just copy that right out of there. And then the repo name is just flutter_deck. Yep.
Yeah, that is okay. Yep.
Now it's going to ask for some socials. In this case, we don't have those yet. So just press enter to leave Discord blank, and you can press enter to leave sponsorship blank. And then I would leave this blank as well if you're already in the directory. And then yes to immediately run pub get and build.
Oh, whoops.
That's fine.
I just realized no is the default.
Yeah, no problem. So what we're going to, so again, as any Dart project will tell you, the first thing you got to do is Dart pub get. So we're going to do that here as well. So we have our dependencies.
All right. And we need to do that manually. There's not a shock alias for it.
That's shock build might do it, but let's assume it doesn't.
Okay.
Because this is typically something you do once and never do it again. So I don't remember if I put it in build. But then now that we have our dependencies, we should be able to run a build. So we'll do shock build and see if this blows up on us.
It's getting exciting now.
Live demo time. Okay, so we can ignore the output for now. We might come back and look at some of this later to see what's happening under the hood. But what this tells us is that we've successfully built. However, we can't see it because it's not being served. So Craig, if you can now say shock serve, we can actually open this in the browser.
Here we go. All right, 4,000. Hey.
Now, to appreciate this one, you'll probably want to make it wider because the kind of minimal, thin mobile version isn't so great. But let's take a quick tour of what we got here. So this is all out of the box. All Craig did is what you saw him do, and now you've got everything you see in front of you. So Craig, first you'll notice in the upper right that if you click on either API docs or GitHub, it will take you to the API docs and GitHub. So there's the Flutter Deck official API docs on pub.
Nice, nice. And then GitHub, yeah, would go to GitHub as, yep.
And then you'll also notice
concatenation game is strong.
That's right. And you'll also notice on the left at the bottom of the navigation, a list of contributors. Those are the actual contributors of the Flutter Deck package. So again, talking about what's the power of Dart in a static site generator, how about a network request out to GitHub to scrape the contributors, and then templating to show the avatars right there.
Pretty good.
In terms of what you get, like structure that you can quickly modify, one, you'll notice that we have category-based navigation on the left. So those are kind of all nonsense articles, but they give you a place to quickly start adding content. Uh-oh, I don't know what that's about.
Oh, looks like it was a relative link or something. Interesting. I'm gonna hover over. Yeah, so it's just going to, it's not prepending the localhost 4000. Must need a leading slash. I think that would fix it.
Okay, interesting. So maybe this is some setting you've got that I don't have. I've never run into that, but certainly maybe we can file a bug about that at some point.
Yeah, so get started. This link, it's very small on the screen. I don't know how to make it bigger. I apologize. In the bottom left of Chrome for me, it's previewing where the URL will go. So this one says localhost 4000 / get started. So this one should resolve. But all the ones that don't start with a slash, I think this is behavior that I've seen on every machine I've had forever. If you don't have no, wait, is that right? Maybe it did normally just append it to the current URL. I don't know. I think maybe you're right. And actually would expect that to work.
This might be one of those kind of quirk mode things where there's a spec that says there should be a leading slash, and then a bunch of systems just say, oh, we're not going to enforce that because some people forget it. So I can definitely add that. I can adjust the functionality here so this doesn't happen in the future, but I hadn't run into this myself. So for me, clicking on those guides brings them up, no problem.
Yeah. Well, they were nonsense articles anyway, so.
Yeah, that's right. But you do have, you can see over on the left, you have top level nav. You also have category nav. That tends to be useful for the larger documentation websites. Also over on the right, you'll see a table of contents. You can click any of those and it'll take you to the section of the page. That table of contents is auto-generated. So any page that you have with different levels of headers, you'll automatically get that table of contents. And if you tap at the top right, if you hit that moon icon, you'll notice that we have light mode and dark mode baked in as well out of the box.
Brilliant. Okay, pretty good. Oh,
and so now,
are they shifting? I can't tell if they're shifting. Surely not, but I think they're kind of moving left and right a few pixels. I'm going to just be silly and hold something on my monitor as I click this button again. They are shifting.
Actually, I bet that's because the sun icon, it might be slightly wider than the moon. It's also possible that there are two different layouts, one for light and dark. It's also possible there's just a value that's different, but it might be the icon size itself.
No, I think you're right. I had just kind of, emojis are all fixed length, I think, and that didn't occur to me, but I think you're totally right. That's what it is. Okay, sorry, I'm really nitpicking.
It's all good. So what we can do now is you can choose your preferred IDE, but if you'd like to open up this directory in the IDE, we can start poking around the files that were generated and modifying them and looking at what they do.
All right, sounds good. What did I call it? Flutter deck docs. Here we go.
And you'll probably, for convenience, you'll probably want to start serving from the IDE if that's where we're going to make modifications. So if you're still serving from terminal, you might want to just Control C out of that.
Sounds good. All right, we'll make this gratuitously large.
Now, I was expecting to see a build directory in here. By chance, does your IDE, is it set to not show things that aren't committed? The things that are getting
I may have actually just manually ignored build. So let me... Oh, that's not the thing I wanted to press. This one, let's see if that's the case. Yes, build right there. False. Okay,
excellent.
Now we've got build.
So looking at the file structure over here on the left, the one thing you'll immediately notice, we have a pub spec YAML, we have a pub spec lock, and we have a bin directory. Those are the building blocks of every Dart CLI or Dart generic project you can ever create. So when we say this is a Dart project, like there's no magic here. It is a Dart project. And if you want to pull up, maybe we start with bin just to handle the Dart code first, because that's actually there's very little Dart code for a default project. You have your main method. So that's what runs whenever you build your website. And by the way, when we say like shock build, that's actually just an alias for doing Dart run bin/main.dart. We're running this like any other Dart application, which runs the main method here. And the main method in a default project like this is doing two things. First, it's configuring your Static Shock pipeline, and then it's telling that pipeline to generate your website, and that's it. Looking at the Static Shock pipeline, we start by perhaps picking some files that we want to copy over to the destination. Like there's no transforming here. We just want them in the destination. So anything under the images directory in this case, we're just going to pick it, copy it on over. Everything after that is just a plugin. So this is an architectural decision, again, heavily influenced by Loom. I think it's a great idea. If Static Shock itself is forced to implement things with plugins, it gives a really good indication that you, the outside developer, will also be able to create plugins to do whatever you want. That's right. So like, again, getting the GitHub contributors, that's just a plugin that ships with the system. The ability to have drafts that don't get published, a plugin that's built with the system or ship with the system. Up above, we have a pretty URLs plugin, which is what, let's talk just for a moment about traditional URLs. Traditionally, if you want to get a web page from a web server, you either have to say something.html, like the actual file that you want, or you have to have an index.html file inside of a directory. So let's say you have a post called myblogpost.html or my blog post. Either you have to say my website website.com/myblogpost.html. That's option 1. That's annoying. Users don't think to enter the .html. Or you have to have a directory called my blog post, which contains an index.html. And then you can just say mywebsite.com/myblogpost. Well, I don't want you to have to actually create a directory for every page just so you can put an index page in there. So in this pipeline, we automatically, if you choose with that plugin, we automatically take your pages, create a directory on your behalf, and change the file name to index. So like right now you're looking at the build directory. Now that's generated. You never modify this. So the pipeline on your behalf is creating those directories, and that's done with the Pretty URLs plugin. You'll also see, of course, Markdown plugin and Jinja. So all that functionality is added through plugins, and then you have every opportunity to write your own plugins or to directly manipulate Static Shock in that main method. And then the last thing we'll look at here, Craig, is at the end of that method, you'll see we tell Static Shock to generate the website. That is a long-running asynchronous task, but once that call is done, your build directory is created and it's filled with all the files ready to be deployed.
Nice. All right. And so I imagine, well, I don't know what I imagine. Do you expect developers will write much code in here other than adding like a custom plugin? Like if I want to use this and I find that there's some real heavy duty wonky behavior that just I want, I imagine the developer experience you're intending is for me to write a plugin, and the only modification that I make to this main method is to add the plugin. Is that correct?
That's right. That's probably going to be the most standard. Now, I will point out that plugins themselves don't have any special privileges. And by that, I mean, let's say, so there's a phase in the pipeline called data loading. And let's say that you wanted to load data from your own server. Yes, you can put that in a plugin, and that would look the most concise here in this file. But you can also directly on the Static Shock object add a data loader. So you don't have to even put it in a plugin. You can just say, here is my data loader, please run this. That becomes a bit of a preference. The primary advantage of plugins is that they're easy to distribute. If you want other people to use them or you want to use them across projects, very easy. If all you want is kind of one task for your one project, you can do that directly on Static Shock, the instance, the object, and you actually don't need to create a plugin at all.
Gotcha. So we got a couple of questions that I think are probably good to get to since folks are wondering here. And 3 or 4 questions came in about the SEO nature of this. And Eric says it generates HTML. So yes, it will support SEO the same way a normal site would. That's totally correct. I think some Flutter developers who are maybe Flutter first developers who just haven't done web stuff, which is of course totally fine. The nature of what exactly works for SEO and like why Flutter doesn't have outstanding SEO is maybe a little mysterious. So yeah, this is just a website. There's nothing, no force on earth would prevent this from having SEO. I mean, I guess you could put a robot.txt file and tell Google not to crawl it, and then you'd have bad SEO. But this sites built with this will have plenty of SEO capabilities. Now, other folks have also mentioned, there are a lot of people are talking about comparing this with Jasper. Maybe we'll do that at the end, but also everyone, just so you know, I'm going to have the creator of Jasper on the show in like 3 weeks, 4 weeks, maybe. So we'll have another deep dive there. The projects are significantly different in terms of what they do and when you would use each one. So that's my just quick little spoiler alert there. But yeah, maybe Matt, at the end, we can kind of just cover the differences between this and Jasper for folks who are wondering. And then I want to scan here real quick, make sure I'm not missing any other questions here. Yeah, more people confirming that it's very SEO compatible. Okay, I think we're caught up.
Cool.
Oh, yeah, no, we're good. We're good. Okay, so let's keep going. And what's next?
So now, just in case the audience missed this, you did restart the Shock serve here in a terminal in the IDE. So at localhost 4000, you still have the website being served. So I'd like to show another convenience here. If you want to just pull that browser up, make sure we're we're connected to the current served version of the website. Just do a refresh.
Okay. Yep. We're connected.
Now, and what page are you on there? Are you on the welcome screen there?
Homepage. Yep.
Okay. Let's open up that's probably index.md, index.markdown. Let's open that up in your IDE and let's take a little look at the markdown for that. That's going to be under the source directory.
Okay. Here we are.
Okay. So we talked a little bit about Markdown. Let's just make sure everyone's on the same page with what Markdown is. Markdown is just an incredibly abbreviated syntax for representing common text-based content semantics. So header 1, header 2, header 3, bold, italics, underline, strike through, the kinds of things that you want in a typical document, article, etc. And in addition to kind of standard typical Markdown, it's also very common to add a little protocol on top, which is called front matter. At the top of this file, you see these little 3 dash line things with some properties in between. Between those dashed lines is YAML. So the actual syntax is YAML, but the ability to put YAML at the top of Markdown with those dashes, that's called front matter. This allows us to set essentially variables in the context of this page, so that when the templating runs, and we haven't seen that yet, but when the templating runs, there is a title variable, a description variable, and a layout variable, all of which are used to then give you the final page. What we're looking at here, therefore, is a combination of those 3 things: front matter in YAML syntax with Markdown content. Now, Craig, would you like to change the Our Mission header to any other text that you can think of and then save that file?
Sure. Yeah. I was looking for, and I apologize for deviating here. I was just looking for where this description was going to be in the page. I was expecting it on a meta tag. Is that
It's
not?
Actually, it's possible that's missing then. It should be in a meta tag. The title meta tag is up there at the top, right?
Yeah, the title one is. Yes.
Okay. So I may just be missing the description in that template, but you're correct that should have been a meta tag.
I just picked that randomly. I've continued to be disruptive here to the demo. Okay, our mission is, that's Korean. I still have not gotten used to having switched cap locks to change my language input. Is to build the entire internet with static shock save. Okay.
And now within a few seconds, you will notice that it updates.
Nice.
So this is like for the Flutter developers out there, this is like a very slow hot reload.
It's like a warm reload.
Yeah. Lukewarm.
Yeah.
So the local development server is watching your file system, and anytime any file in your source changes, a rebuild is run. Now, right now, and then not only is the rebuild run, but the WebSocket then tells your connected website, hey, something changed, please refresh. Now, this is currently done in a very dumb way. There's like 0 optimizations here. And so this will be slow, and it will get slower as you do more complex things. However, over time, we'll make this smarter. We'll reduce the churn here, and it'll get faster and faster. Right now, expect a few seconds, and then the page will update. What that means is that with all of the kind of fake content that's generated, you can start serving your Static Shock website locally, and then you can just go start replacing text in the fake content with whatever you want it to actually be, and you'll see that within a few seconds in your actual local deployment or your local web server to quickly iterate. I mean, we're kind of reinventing the nature of hot reload. What it brought to Flutter is just this rapid process of going from where you started to where you want to be.
Yeah, and I imagine a large problem space awaits you as you look to optimize those builds. Only rebuilding what changed is, I hope you enjoy graph theory and all those kind of things, because you best start believing in ghost stories, Mr. Turner. You're in one. Like,
that's right.
That should be fun to work on, I imagine.
Yeah. And we'll see how, first of all, I try to work from the principle that nothing is needed until someone shows up asking for it. And so the amount of optimization that's done there will probably be based on people showing up saying, hey, it's taking 20 seconds to rebuild every time and I can't make any progress. Can you fix this? And then I'll fix that situation and we'll just keep going until good enough is good enough.
So everyone, put in the chat right now, it takes 20 seconds to build. Can you speed that up?
It's not real unless somebody filed it on GitHub. So if you have problems with Static Shock, GitHub, file an issue, just like you're used to doing with Flutter, and then we'll take it from there.
All right. And then we're all going to thumbs up the issues and tweet about them.
Yep. That sounds about right.
That's the nature of it these days. Okay. So we've built, we've served, we've generated, and now warm reloaded. But we haven't done anything yet with documentation. But I'm guessing there's not like a plugin that's going to scan the repo. We'll have to probably pull out the parts of that exemplary README and put them into individual files ourselves. Am I anticipating that correctly?
That's right. And so maybe we can do that for just a couple pages, a couple pieces of cohesive content that we can at least show the audience. Again, I assume everyone's used to Markdown because it's also the GitHub issue ticket format, but maybe we could show the audience how to write a little bit of Markdown and what it looks like to create a couple of these pages. Also, if we want to bring in some images, we can decide where to put those images in your local file system. And that's partially preference, but we can just see what that looks like if you'd like to go through the process.
Sure. Yeah, sounds good. Let's do it. So I'll bring up the sidebar again, close some of these. I'm leaving to build the entire internet with Static Shock. That's clearly correct. So how do you think about, so I can close build. Source is what we care about. This is where, the Markdown files go. So concepts here, was this a directory? So concepts was actually just a header here. Tell me about what is turning this folder not into an actual chunk in our URLs, which is what I would have expected. Okay, so and this file is also fairly brief, but instead a header on the side here.
Let's talk a little bit about this concept of data. Actually, let me set a little more context here for the overall pipeline process. There are a few concepts, a few artifacts that you accumulate in the generation process. Pages are the most obvious one. A page is a web page. It's something you can go to at a URL and get a user experience. It's an HTML page. Then there are assets. These are your images, your font files, your CSS files, your JavaScript files. These are things you copy directly to the destination and they're made available. But then there's also a concept called data. Every page has access to this global data index. It's a hierarchy of essentially keys and values. And you can store anything in there that you want, but that data can then be used in templates to decide what's displayed on a given page. Well, you may notice these _data.yaml files, that there are a few of them are scattered about. These are the answer to the convenient way to quickly add some data to the data index. Any _data.yaml file will be located, and any key values in that file will be automatically placed into the global data index and made available to any page that wants to use it. The one little nuance here is that the location of the data.yaml file determines which pages have access to that data. So that _data.yaml in guides is only visible to the guides pages within that directory. It's only things below the directory structure that get it. Up there in concepts, only the concept pages get access to the _data.yaml. But if you look down towards the bottom with the _data above get started, that's at the very top level of the source.
Yeah, okay.
That's right. So everything in that file is available everywhere all the time to all pages. So there's a bit of a hierarchy here. And this goes back to kind of that earlier principle, which is, on the one hand, we should all be empowered to do things with Dart when needed, but there are often far more convenient ways to use basic configuration to do simple things. We want the best of both worlds. We want simplicity of configuration. We want the power of Dart. That's what we're aiming to do here with these data files. So to your question about, okay, how do these, how does this concepts and guides category get in there with those articles? So in that data file you're looking at right now, let's go down to the bottom. I think you'll find a navigation configuration.
Oh, it does go down further than I realized.
Yeah. By the way, if you're wondering why those empty lines are there, when the syntax to generate these files has little mustache templates in it, like not to generate the final website, to generate your project files.
Mm-hmm.
And so those empty lines are where mustache variables have or statements have disappeared. So here in navigation, the way that this website is currently configured, it knows that there's a property called navigation, which has a property called items. And now you see where guides and concepts come from. There's the title, which is what is displayed in the left bar. And then tag is what is queried. So when that layout is built, it queries all the pages that have the tag guides, and it sorts them based on the property called nav order. And that's how you get the list of actual pages in the navigation on the left. So again, the category is guides, search all pages with the tag guides, sort by the nav order, and the template, the HTML template, Jinja template, then uses that information to create the navigation that you see.
So what does nav order mean here? My brain actually, even though you're saying nav order and this says nav order, for a second I was just thinking alphabetical order. But
that's right.
You can
so each of
specify
those,
nav order.
that's right.
Okay.
And that's by the way, that's not some official concept or term. That was just my choice. I wanted to control the order, so I introduced a property with a name that I chose. I chose the name nav order. You can call it whatever you want, and then I gave it a number. And so the Jinja system will then assume that you really do have a property called nav order on these pages. It will treat it as something that can be compared, and then it will order your query results accordingly.
So I could just type total nonsense, and then I could sort by ASDF if I had done that on every page. Is that correct?
That's right. Now, I don't remember what the result will be for running comparison on a string. In theory, that should work fine. Whether it works the way you intend, that's a different question. But that's correct. You can use any property you want with any name that you define.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Cool. So let's see here. We've got, so this is our data. So this is a global context that is made available to all descendant pages. And because it's at the root, that's what makes it global. It's actually just a context that is available to all descendant pages, and it's at the root. So it's global. This is a context that is, again, available to all descendant pages, which is just the ones in its folder. And
subfolders.
Yes. Sorry, I was saying that because there are no subfolders in this one, but yes.
That's right.
Were there subfolders? Yes. All right. So that has brought together, I'm going to close some of these files here. That has brought together our homepage. And you had mentioned some stuff about bringing in images and seeing where we put those. And then there's also the actual markdown file to get to kind of stripping for parts. What do you think we should do next?
I'd say let's pick the page and the content that you want to bring over. Let's bring over the non-image content first, and then we'll circle back for an image or two.
All right. So this will be obviously a good image to get, and we'll grab that later. So now there was also some magic table of contents stuff. And so I'm guessing this isn't where we would start, and that we can kind of reverse engineer, or Static Shock might be able to help us with table of contents stuff. I don't think we're going to start with this content, right?
That's right. No need to copy the table of contents. We'll just grab whatever actual content you want to pull over.
Okay. So I think we start with, actually, and I'm going to switch to the raw version of the README file. Oh, not quite there yet. All right. So I think we should start, and we can potentially use, I was wondering if we could use the information hierarchy in the README to inform our our choices for where we delineate pages. We've got an H2, another H2. Oh, I should make this text bigger. A couple H2s to open the README, and then this section's pretty long. Maybe every H2 is a page, is what it sounds like. And then here we finally got a subtitle on one of the pages.
Yeah,
Does
sounds
that
reasonable.
seem right to you? Okay.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. So we're in source, and concepts and guides are also just arbitrary, right? We could delete those or just repurpose them.
That's right.
Maybe it's guide, I guess. So let's stick with guide, and in guide 1, this one will be called installation. And I'm going to grab all of the text and paste it in. This was some nice fake Latin you had there. Sorry to see it go. Okay, so we have our first file, and it's hot. It's warm reload building. And so in theory, there it is. Installation. But let's figure out that real quick. Actually, is that going to be like, is this baked into?
Yeah, it's probably going to be deeper.
Static Shock?
I think just for the sake of not taking up people's time with that, maybe just manually for now, stick that extra slash in there, and I'll figure out this problem on my end.
That's not what I expected. Or do I need to say guides?
You do need the guides, although I'm wondering, do you want to check your build file and we can check the path there? Because again, this is a glorified file server. So guides, okay, for some reason it looks like it's still called guide 1. Oh, I'm sorry. Did you change the file name as well, or did you only change the title property?
I did not change the file name.
Okay. So this is one of the, so there's, in the world of static site generators, and this goes beyond that, but the idea of convention is very common. And one of the conventions that we use here is that not only does the directory structure impact the URL, but the name of your file is the name of the last path in the URL.
I needed to refresh first. I'm going to put this in my clipboard. Actually, we'll get rid of this as well. All right, that's in clipboard. This won't load, but now once I paste that in, it should resolve. There we go.
There you go.
Right. Nice. Now, is there a way to get the button at the bottom here that says kind of on the right, go to the next one, and on the left, previous, or do we need a plugin for that?
You do need a plugin. I'm not quite done with that one yet, but that's called pagination or pagination, however you want to pronounce that. Sometimes you'll see a bunch of numbers to jump to different pages, and sometimes you just have next and previous. But at the end of the day, it's about querying all related pages and then making sure that you inject conditionally the next, the previous, the number. So I'm still working on that, but we'll have a solution for that pretty soon.
Okay, nice. Okay, let's make a couple more of these. What do we think we're going to title this one?
Now that one might make sense as the welcome, would be my guess.
Okay, so we'll rename the file this time to welcome.
Oh, so we already have a welcome top level page if you wanted to put it there. I'm sorry. It gets, I guess index.markdown in this case, because it's the true top level page.
Ooh, it keeps rebuilding on me. And then for some reason, well, I guess it's not too mysterious. As the build file changes, the contents of this change, well, it was expanded at least. VS Code is like jumping all around like crazy.
I think VS Code might be auto running a save on files, and because we don't know if you actually changed it or not, we just say, oh, technically the file system reported a change, so we rebuild.
Got it. All right, so in get started, this is where you were imagining. Oh no, in index.
That's right.
This is where you're imagining putting it. Okay,
you're gonna have to lose your awesome title, your awesome level 2 header here, but yeah, this is probably where it makes sense.
It was a bold vision. Scrolling down. Okay, so until the next H2. And there we are. Okay. Good.
And then you might want to change the title there to, let's see what, I guess, hello. I guess probably it makes sense for the welcome to become hello Flutter deck. And then we can remove the explicit markdown H2 that says hello Flutter deck.
Okay. I like that. Although we got to keep the emoji. Otherwise, what are we even doing? Can you put emojis in a browser title? Yeah, you can, right? You can have an emoji show up here.
We're about to find out.
All right, let's do it. So hello, Flutter deck. I'm going to go back to the site. Go back to the future. Oh, the mid build. Do it again. Do it again. Oh, I need a slash, I think. Nope.
Maybe we just straight up broke it. So let's to debug that. Let's close out of the serve and do a shock build. And I'll just do one build, and we'll see if we get some red marks here somewhere.
Now this is pod racing. Here we go.
Okay.
Not valid.
So it turns out that at least the YAML parser that we're using does not like your emoji.
Oh, I love compound emojis. You know, there's anyone who's surprised by this, just like Google Unicode emojis, compound emojis or something, they're so fascinating. It's really cool how emojis work.
It was a really neat engineering idea that has made building text editing a nightmare.
Okay. I also, a while ago, I was building a chat experience. This is a total aside, deep into the land of emojis. I was building a chat experience and wanted emojis to just be larger, because if they are rendered at the same font size as the surrounding letters, they actually look really small. So I think in essentially every chat app that we use, emojis are detected and made bigger. So I was using a text span and a rich text or whatever it is to have a paragraph, essentially, a visually just one paragraph actually internally be composed of multiple different text snippets with their own properties. And the task of figuring out which of the Unicode bytes in a string were actually an emoji was hellacious. So yes, it absolutely has made that kind of string parsing really quite a chore. I'm sympathetic to you there. I know you've worked a lot on text input, and it's an enormous challenge. Okay, I think it built this time while I was rambling.
Okay, so if the build worked, we'll go back to shock serve and we'll bring it back up.
All right, this time it's going to be found. I'm going to check some chat questions real quick. Flutter IT asking how to style. That's a great question. We'll do some styling soon, I imagine, but basically just add CSS. Actually, I should click your question there. So you add CSS, but we'll probably do some of that before we're done here. More questions about SEO folks might have missed. All SEO, we're just building the website here. So you'd have to have bad SEO practices yourself to lose out on SEO. Any other questions here? And then there's still more. What about animation in 3D objects? Well, you can put any content you want in there. So you could inject a 3JS script and, do something with 3D. This is the process of writing what's going to be on each page over here in Markdown, and then building all the HTML files and doing all that tedium yourself. But whatever JavaScript you want to put in an HTML page is still totally available to you. And if you want to animate a 3D thing, then you can do that. Okay, I think we're mostly caught up. So now let's go back here and refresh, and we're back. And we did lose the emoji, but it's okay. All right. Oh, nice. You've got some syntax highlighting here going as well. And does all right. So how many languages does this support? I imagine if you're using broader libraries, maybe it's lots of languages, but how did you get syntax highlighting here?
The template includes highlight.js, which is probably the most common JavaScript tool for doing that. And I don't remember, now you can include languages a la carte. And I don't remember whether I included like base language support. I think I probably explicitly added Dart, but you may need to add more imports or more CDN references for other languages if needed.
Got it. Got it. Okay. All right. Yeah, we see highlight.js has left its mark on this HTML element. Well, you can't really see it because everything's tiny and, I can't have nice things apparently. Anyway, does zooming in here work? Oh, it does. That's great. There it is. Highlight.js. Okay. Let's continue on. How many pages do you think it makes sense to add here? Maybe one or two more, and then
Yeah,
do a little styling or images?
I think people are welcome to ask questions if they're confused by anything they've seen, but I'm guessing this has all been very straightforward, that we took some markdown, we shoved it into a markdown file, and we got the expected markdown on the page. There's not much more to editing text content than that. Maybe we can just pick one with an image, and we'll find some place to stick the image and show that we can actually load that. Now, technically, as we copy from GitHub uploads images to their own, like they create a URL for it. So actually, technically, if we literally copy the same markdown, we should get the image remotely.
Just use their CDN. Yeah.
Yeah. So we could go either way. We can just use the URL, or we can actually copy the image locally and show what that looks like.
All right, let's be cheeky and start with that. So this whole thing, this kind of appeared. I'm just wondering where it even makes sense to put this.
Well, down below a ways, I think we start running into a bunch of images in the README. And so maybe one of those would have a logical page.
Okay, great. That makes sense. So title slide, I'll go back, see where the H2s are here. Oh, whoops. That's not what I meant to do. Forgetting what's in what tab. All right, slide templates, title slide. I think title slide. Yeah, here we go. So this whole page has multiple images. So let's do that. Slide images or slide templates. I'll get everything below that down to the next H2. And I'm scrolling a lot of H3s here. So this is a pretty hefty page. Oh, it's maybe too hefty. It's quite hefty. I no longer think we want to merely divide on H2s. I'm going to I'll make this title slide one because that ends in the image. There it is. That's what we'll do. So title slide is going to be a page. Got it. And for now, I'm just going to put this in guides, new file. Actually, no, we'll rename guide 2. That's what it'll be. Rename. What was this called? Title slide?
Yeah.
Maybe plural, title slides. Nope, singular. And now you're going to be title slide. Here comes the sun. Do 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 do. All right, so we've got that image listed, and this is standard markdown syntax for an image, of course, because we copied it from valid markdown. And now when I save, we should be able to come back over here, make this a little bigger. Where am I? I am on the home page. Gotta do this. Okay, title slide. The same thing. Localhost 4000. Ooh, it's big. All right, let's add a max width to this. How about that?
Sure. So I'm sure there's a number of ways to do that. If you were actually doing this directly,
the only way I know to do it is
that's certainly the fastest. You could, of course, do it through CSS, but that's going to apply it to kind of like every page or something.
Yeah.
And I think these days image tags no longer use the closing slash.
Oh, okay. I'm old school. I haven't done web in a minute. Oh, I've got to wait for it to rebuild. Now it's rebuilt. There we go. All right. Yeah, honestly, someone asked, how do we style as well? So why don't we add a little CSS? Let's actually go back. I'm willing to bet that a reasonable global style would be that just all images have a width of 100%.
Sure. Let's give it a try.
So let's add some styles.
There is a styling approach that comes with this template, which you're showing. This approach uses Sass, but there are no constraints here. If you want to use direct CSS without Sass, that's fine. If you want to use Tailwind, there's a plugin for that as well. But we'll make the change here to the Sass. So Sass is CSS plus more stuff. If you just want an image rule, you could probably, is there an HTML and body tag combination at the top? No. Okay. And this is the global one there, right? This isn't light or dark.
Correct. Yep.
Okay, so let's above navbar, let's do HTML comma body, and then braces, and then image. Yep, and then go ahead and do your width 100. Now, although actually, I will point out this is going to impact the little icon in the upper left, the what would be the logo for it. So we might actually want to find out what tag surrounds the body of the page. And if you want, this can actually allow us to go look at layouts real quick. So if you want to go up to underscore includes directory under sources or under source, underscore includes is a special place where you can put what are called components and layouts. A layout is a template for an entire page. A component is either a snippet of code you want to reuse or even a snippet with a template that you want to reuse. In our case, docs underscore page.jinja is the layout for the whole page, which should show us, we can find out what tag is around the body of the page.
Oh, I see what you're saying here. Okay. Yep. That makes sense.
And again, to push home the concept of templating, all those pages that we're navigating between, they all use this one template. So there's no duplicating of HTML across it. There's just the one template. So yeah, let's look in here. We'll go past the nav and find where the actual main content begins.
Oh, right. Sorry. I was, I know. Now, a minute ago, I said I knew what you meant. Now I'm actually following. So it looks like it's page content.
Okay. So we can do, we can do, let's see, so it's where you have that image, let's do .page content space image.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, either one of those directions work fine.
Okay.
And now we should see our little icon go back to its desired size, but our content image should now fit within the page.
All right, we're 2 for 2 on that wish list. Nice. Yeah. So for anyone who's not written Sass before, like this isn't valid CSS that browsers can parse, but it just turns it into HTML, and then it starts another one for body, and then under each one it adds page, content, image, and then width 100%, and it'll do the same thing. And what I'm writing might not be 100% accurate of exactly what it turns it into, but it should be something like this. That this is, both of the highlighted snippets are valid CSS if my 10-year-old web developer brain still works, and then the browsers know how to parse that. But it's easier to write Sass. So that's kind of what we're looking at here. Okay, so I'm going to save the deletion of that nonsense. And we've got images. We've got content. We've styled. We've answered the question about SEO, which is that this is SEO rich by default. And let me return to a couple other questions in the chat here. Oh, by the way, all the way back at the top, we had a little Matt Carroll love. No, wait a minute. This is love for Matt Carroll.
Yeah, I don't know who that is, but he needs to stop impersonating me.
Or just, unrelated. Hi to us. And then like, separately, Matt Carroll.
I don't know about this Matt Carroll guy, but Matt Carroll's pretty awesome. He's got a great YouTube channel.
Yeah, God, huge Matt Carroll stan over here. Okay, so we had teased a little bit of the Jasper Static Shock difference. We'll get to that in just a second. There were a handful of questions about performance. And we talked earlier about the actual build time performance. And then there was the kind of blunt rebuild topic that's already been covered. I'm guessing that this person is talking about maybe runtime performance or when users actually show up. I'm also just going to ditch my screen here unless we start using it again. So this is, again, just the nature of the old school web. But Matt, you want to walk us through, how does a static website handle, what is the performance story of a static website?
Yeah. So performance largely comes down to two things when it comes to websites. There is the size and time of, the time of the download, which is both a question of, primarily a question of size. So are you downloading large files? The larger the files, the longer the download, the longer the time for a website to initially load. Once files are downloaded by the browser, there is then the time to first paint. That's all of the stuff downloaded gets processed by the browser, gets turned into what's called the document object model. CSS styles are applied, and then the UI is actually painted. Nothing we're doing with Static Shock really impacts the first paint time. That's up to you. Do you include, do you do things that are generally helpful or not helpful to the first paint time? That's beyond the scope of Static Shock. That's up to you. Static Shock does have an impact, or can have an impact, on the amount of things initially downloaded. Currently, Static Shock does the most direct thing, which is it copies over all the files you want, generates all the files you want, and doesn't try to merge any of them. So every one of your markdown pages becomes an HTML page. Every image that you pick is copied directly over as an image file. Every font file, all the CSS. There's not really any explicit packaging that's done. Now, in my experience across all the static sites that I put out there so far, that hasn't been any issue, because when you're dealing with the relatively small amount of content that you tend to have in a static site, it's just not enough to pose any issue. It's possible that if we get users of Static Shock who, again, maybe they have tens of thousands of lines of CSS or something like that, it may become, you may end up with download difficulties where it just takes a long time to download all the stuff. Maybe then we have to look at, how do we bundle this into singular files, or how do we break things out, shard it into multiple files? But I haven't run into that problem.
Downloads or something.
Right. And so, and also, like, if page 1 needs thing 1 and page 2 needs thing 2, you don't need to download thing 1 and thing 2 on page 1. You can wait till the user requests it. Mm-hmm. But again, because I haven't run into that, and because no one's requested or posted any issues, I haven't spent any time on that. But I'll at least mark that as an area that might require more work later. For those coming from a web background, you'll be familiar with Gulp and Grunt and Webpack and Vite. These are all tools that take a bunch of different browser-based files and combines them in different ways to optimize that download time. Again, if you're building a static site, odds are you're solving a problem you don't have at that point. But if someone runs into that, come file an issue. Let me know what's taking so long to download. Let me know what the problem is, and we'll figure something out.
Yeah. And I would, I would add to all of that in general, static sites are the most, if what you're building lends itself to a static website. Not everything does, but if it does, then static websites are the runaway most performant option that you have available to you. Because if you've got too much CSS, that's presumably going to be an issue however you build your website. And also, I've never heard of a website having that much CSS. That would be a lot of CSS. The static sites in this generation, whatnot, returned after the era of database and backend driven stuff, because sometimes if you have a really popular thing but this website, this page is like producing the exact same HTML every single time, but for some reason, just because you're using a backend framework, there's like 4 ultimately pointless database queries that run on every single request to this page. And then the exact same HTML is rendered every single time from the backend. If Justin Bieber or Ariana Grande tweet about your website and suddenly you have a trillion visitors show up, your website will just crash. And that's, lost opportunity to have your 15 minutes of fame. But a static website is probably not going to have that problem, and it'll just serve the prepared file as fast as it can. And especially if you put it on a big hosting solution, then, you can have unexpected fame come your way. We all would that it could, right? And the static website technology stack is just up to the challenge. So in terms of performance, I would say that this is the runaway best way to build a website. Again, if what you're building lends itself to a static website. Obviously,
that's right.
Does.
Yeah, the best performance characteristic that you can get from a dynamic website is to essentially have a caching strategy that, on average, turns it into a static website.
Yep.
So if you're just directly creating a static website, there are very few places where you could create a bad performance experience with static sites. So If you run into it, by all means, let me know. But start by assuming that nothing you do is going to matter from a performance perspective with static sites.
Yep. All right, a couple questions about Jasper. This could be potentially an interesting place to end. For folks who know a little bit about Jasper, maybe they're already working out the differences, but there's some differences. And then Randall actually refined this question. So Gary asked, "Hey Matt, what are some of the differences between Static Shock and Jasper?" To which my mind immediately went to some large differences. But then Randall says, yes, contrasting this with Jasper SSR, server-side rendering, would be good. And that, server-side rendering is still not the same as static generation. It's still happening per request, but it gets you closer potentially. And Matt, how do you think about all this?
So the answer to this question, unfortunately, has changed recently. For seemingly for years, the publicity around Jasper was, hey, you can write Dart code, and that Dart code will be converted essentially into HTML. I don't know if Jasper also did CSS and JavaScript, but I think the core value prop was, hey, maybe you're not familiar with these browser syntaxes. Use the Dart language syntax you're already familiar with, plus code hinting, type safety, that kind of stuff, and we will create for you the browser stuff like HTML and, again, maybe CSS and maybe some JavaScript. So for years, that was the goal, that was the plan. Somewhat recently, that plan has shifted to include, it appears, static site generation, which means that now Jasper is heading in the direction of Static Shock. What this likely means, unfortunately, and this kind of dovetails with this conversation I've been having on Flutter Spaces over and over for quite some time, which is, it sure would be nice if we could get people working together instead of people competing with each other when what you're going to end up building is roughly equivalent. So here's what I predict is likely to happen now. Jasper will begin evolving towards the things that Static Shock already does in general static site generation. And as will be necessary, Static Shock is going to start to move towards writing browser-based stuff with Dart, because now there's a competitive landscape. Wouldn't be my preference. I wish we could have just divided those two responsibilities and then collaborated. But for purposes of transparency, we are now moving in the same direction and competing for the same audience. So all of you out there will have to decide which direction you want to go. I would just hope and ask that you give Static Shock a try, see if it works for you, give us a chance to build what you need. But we're both going to be operating in the static site generation space moving forward.
Gotcha. I didn't even know that about Jasper. Well, that's interesting and news to me right now. My memory of it is fairly old, when, again, what I recall was that it was a Flutter-like API. I mean, it was kind of like a Flutter HTML renderer, but
yeah,
different.
It took this kind of widget composition, but instead of ending up with widgets, you would end up with HTML elements.
Yeah.
I'm sure I'm butchering that to a certain extent, but if you want the high level, that's how it was described and sold, and that was the value proposition.
Yeah. That was my memory of it as well. Okay. Well, anyway, Matt, thanks for building Static Shock. I know you had messaged Chris Sells and I about potentially this project kicking off like quite a long time ago, and I was in no space to do anything really on it. And then you have obviously taken the idea and run with it, and Static Shock looks awesome. I mean, to compete on features, even obviously the language difference between something like a Static Shock and Jekyll will always be there and differentiate them meaningfully. But just to compete on features with something over 10 years old is a Herculean effort for sure. I imagine a lot of your weekends have gone into building Static Shock. So it looks pretty great. And my personal website has been decrepit, and I don't even think the domain resolves to anything anymore for some time. So who knows? I might, if I ever find some motivation to resuscitate that, I might just do it with Static Shock.
Yeah, go for it. And I should also point out there's a really easy integration story with GitHub pages. So probably, I think every website that I showed at the beginning of the stream is actually built and hosted on GitHub pages. And the nice thing there is that every time you can set up an action so that every time you push a commit to your repo, GitHub automatically reruns the build and redeploys the website. So it's like you were talking about server-side rendering. It's like just enough server-side rendering. The moment you make a change, it rebuilds, and then it never rebuilds again because you got the latest, and so it's all good to go.
Yeah, server-side rendering one time.
That's right.
Sai asks, so this is mainly on Dart rather than Flutter, right? Yeah. So this is very close to maybe literally. I'm guessing it is literally nothing to do with Flutter.
Zero Flutter.
Yeah, zero Flutter. Definitely not a dependency, and probably not even really any concepts taken from Flutter.
Right. And I will say, so I've been perhaps the biggest proponent in our ecosystem that you should be able to use Flutter to render a static website. And for a long time, I had I showed you earlier my personal contracting page and Flutter Bounty Hunters and Flutter Bounty Hunters blog. There was a time when all three of those were actually rendered with Flutter. They were Flutter apps just for the static website. As much as I believe in that goal, there are hurdles in the way. And I don't know when those hurdles are going to be removed. Most of them aren't even in the control of the Flutter team. They're in the control of browser standards. So what Static Shock is about is how can we still preserve our Dart ecosystem while completely leaning into the reality that right now it is not effective to create static websites with Flutter itself. So lean into all those browser technologies, but do it in a way that Dart developers can understand and can take control of that system.
Yeah, absolutely. Michael says, been using Hugo. Looks like I'll be able to port a bunch of my content since Hugo uses Markdown also. Yeah, a lot of these static site generators are adopting, Matt was talking about even just within Dart, the swapping of ideas as packages kind of move toward each other. Across languages, this happens as well. If you had just dropped me into this this Static Shock project, but hid the pub spec from me and whatnot, I think I would have thought it was a Jekyll project. The front matter, the source, the underscore includes folder, like all these things are the same. And rightfully so. It's like, why reinvent a wheel? Why distance yourself from muscle memory and understanding that static site generator users already have? So yeah, I would expect tons of overlap, not just with Hugo and Jekyll, but lots of static site generators.
Yeah, and real quick point there. One thing, so I mentioned that documentation is a big focal point for what I want a great out of the box experience to be. A really popular generator for documentation is called Docusaurus, and I believe it's JavaScript, TypeScript, that kind of stuff. What I'm going to do, one of my next goals is I'm going to take the standard Docusaurus template and experience, and I'm just going to recreate it in Static Shock. And so you're going to be able to choose a starting template, which is essentially, I want Docusaurus, but in Static Shock. So that's one of the next things that are coming, to the point of like, oh, hey, I have this existing thing. It wouldn't take much work to move it over. Well, if you have Docusaurus, soon it will take very, very little work for you to move that over and keep exactly what you have.
Nice. That'll be great. Okay. Well, folks, I think this probably does it for us. Matt, thank you so much for coming on the show and walking us all through Static Shock. Do you have any final thoughts before I sign us off?
I'd like to plug a few things if you don't mind.
Sure.
Now, Craig, I don't know if you've ever joined us on Flutter Spaces, but every Wednesday at 12 p.m. Pacific, I co-host a Twitter space, X space, whatever you want to call it, with Ray Lee. We talk about, the topic's different every week, but it's always Flutter or Dart. And we typically talk for a couple of hours. Everybody in the audience is welcome on stage. You can come ask any question, make any comment. So if that interests you out there, again, 12 p.m. Pacific, if you just follow me on Twitter, the space will appear when I start it, and you can join us there. Also, I try to do as much community work as I can, and one of the ways that I support that is through GitHub sponsorships. So if any of you would feel so inclined, I'd love your monthly sponsorship over on GitHub, and I've made the following offer to all of you in the community. For every 10 of you that sign up as a monthly sponsor, I will fix a bug in the Flutter framework. I will record myself doing it, and I will post that video to YouTube to show the community how it's done. And we've already done that for the first set of sponsors. There's already a video over on the Flutter Bounty Hunters channel to do that. We're almost to the next group, so I'll do it over again. But every 10, I will fix a bug, and I'll show you how to do it. And then the last thing is, we talked a little bit about the Flutter Bounty Hunters earlier, but I'd like to make sure everyone knows what this organization is about. One of the great things about open source is that if you solve a problem really well in the open, no other company ever has to spend money solving that problem again. So as I think about how do we get more Flutter adoption? One of the ways to do it is for a startup to be able to spend as much money as possible on what makes them unique and valuable, and spend as little as possible on the same kinds of things that 10 other startups in other business verticals had to also solve. So at the Flutter Bounty Hunters, we're trying to solve those problems. And Craig, I mentioned Super Editor earlier. And by the way, as soon as you want to have me back to talk about Super Editor, I'd love to dig into that. But Super Editor is a document editing toolkit for Flutter apps. So like Superlist, for example, uses Super Editor to do document editing. ClickUp uses Super Editor. Clearful uses Super Editor. Reflection uses Super Editor. Bringing Fire uses Super Editor. Very different businesses and app experiences. And yet Super Editor powers all of those things because it solves the underlying annoying problems. And so if your company or your team would like for us to solve those boring, tedious problems in the open for the last time, go to flutterbountyhunters.com. And I've also recently opened up a referral program. So let's say that maybe you don't work for a company that needs help, but you know one that does. Any client that you introduce to us that results in actual open source work, I will send you 10% of net billables for the first 3 months. So let's say a company contracts us to do $10,000 a month in open source work for 3 months. I'll pay you $3,000. And this is just part, again, of my effort. I told you, Craig, I left the Flutter team in 2020 to accelerate Flutter adoption. The Flutter Bounty Hunters is just one way I'm trying to do that. I want to get as much value in open source as possible so that startups can go build what they do best. And yes, thank you.
Twitter handle?
That is my Twitter handle. There's one letter missing, which is the E in super, and that's thanks to the character limit on the Twitter handles. So it is super declarative on Twitter/X.
It's funny. It's very hard to pronounce that in a way that actually removes the E.
So I chose the right one then of all the letters to remove.
Yeah, I think you did. I had a couple of thoughts there. First of all, I think that's probably that's the richest, most lucrative referral framework setup that I've ever heard. I think I've not written them all down, so I can't say with total certainty, but 10% for 3 months is pretty significant. And also fixing bugs for every 10.
Those are the cheapest bug
sponsors.
fixes. Those are the cheapest bug fixes the Flutter framework is ever going to get.
Yeah, true. And literal bounty hunting.
Yes.
So you're taking the name very seriously, very literally, and I love it. Yeah, that is straight up bounty hunting. You are going out and solving problems for bounties, and that's great.
That's right.
Okay. So, no. Coral's missing. Darn it.
And I think did that manage to be yet another spelling, or was that the original spelling as well?
No, that was another spelling. You're right. The other one I think was Coroll. So now there's 3 similar Matts afoot. Yep.
All the wrong GitHub sponsorships. Everybody but me is going to end up with a GitHub sponsorship.
So many bugs that are still open because of this. Goodness gracious. Yeah.
Well, Craig, let me also say, by the way, I really appreciate you having me on today. And I was saying earlier, I'm a late night kind of guy, so I have respect that you get up every week and do this. And again, any of those other packages you ever want to explore, I'm just a phone call away. Happy to come back here and walk through any of them.
Great. Sounds good. Yeah. My dog wakes me up at 6 a.m. every day. So I've already taken him on a long walk, played with him in the yard, did some chores around the house. I mean, 9 a.m. for me is almost time to go back to bed. So yeah, I'm a primo morning person. But anyway, folks, thanks so much for tuning in. Thanks for joining us as we discovered all that there is to build and do with Static Shock. Looking forward, next week I'm going to be back here like normal. I don't know yet what I'll talk about. There's nothing planned. And then the following 2 weeks I'll be out of town, but I'll remind everyone of those unexciting details again next week. So for now, this will do it for today's episode. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll see everyone next week.